So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you don't know, I am John McDougall. I am the event coordinator at Murder by the Book in Houston. If you are unfamiliar with our store, we are primarily a mystery bookstore. We've been in business since 1980. We do branch out, like we were mentioning before. We've had Nalini for her previous books in the Side Changeling series. We've had Jayne at the store for a couple of the Amanda Quick books. So while we do primarily mystery, we also branch out. Essentially, if it's something that one of the staff members loves, or we know that there are readers out there, we welcome everything, even though we're primarily mystery. So for any of you guys that had already ordered copies of Jayne's book, as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, we got the signed book plates in Friday, so those are going out. If you pre-ordered both books together, we're just waiting for Nalini's to come out with the book plates for those. If you haven't ordered either, we've got book plate. If you just got a ticket, we've got book plates for both, so you can definitely order those from the Murder by the Book website, and I will drop a link to that in the chat in just a second. So please feel free to use the chat function to chat back and forth between each other. Just here's my general blanket. Like, if you are in the chat, just be really mindful of spoilers. Jayne's book has been out for a little bit and Nalini's isn't out yet. So if you've read either of them, please feel free to talk about them. Just be very careful about spoilers. Also, kind of potential big spoilers for either author's books in the Q&A. And my disclaimer is, if you're not sure whether or not your question is a spoiler, it probably is. So just kind of be aware of that. So I'm going to get them both introduced so we can get this chat started. I think we're in for a big treat tonight. So we're joined by Jayne Krentz. She's the author of more than 50 New York Times bestsellers. She's written contemporary romantic suspense novels under that name and futuristic and historical romance novels under the pseudonyms Jayne Castle and Amanda Quick, respectively. Tonight she's going to be chatting about her newest book, which is called All the Colors of Night, which is the second in the Fog Lake series. It just came out on January 5th. How are you tonight, Jayne?
I am great. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks for joining us. We are also joined by Nalini Singh, who is the New York Times bestselling author of the Guilt Hunter series, which includes most recently Archangel's War. She is the author of the Side Changeling novels, including Silver Silence, Ocean Light, and Wolf Rain. So her new book is called Quiet in Her Bones. It's not quite out just yet. We tried to plan the event so that way it would be sort of between the release dates of the two books, so we would be able to chat with both of them. So her new book, Quiet in Her Bones, is going to come out on February 23rd, and we're super excited that it's kind of just a straightforward thriller. Like I said, we're primarily mystery, but we branch out to other stuff, but we love when an author that we previously liked from other stuff does something that's like right up the customer's alley, so we can introduce new readers to somebody who's been writing for a while. How are you tonight, Nalini?
I'm good.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. Before I head out one more time, guys, if you have any questions for either author, pop those in the Q&A. I will be back in just a little bit to relay any of those questions. So y'all have a great chat, and I will see you in just a little bit.
Okay, hi. So I am a Jayne Krentz super fan. And so this is so exciting for me. So I have to keep it together while I do this. So Jayne probably doesn't remember this. I'm sure you don't remember this. My very first Romance Writers of America conference, I found you. I may have stalked you through the conference until I found you. And then I basically was like, oh, I'm such a big fan. I love everything you write. And oh my God, I'm so excited. I'm sure I was terrifying to you, but so I'm glad you don't remember, because you might have, turned this down. So I am super excited to be here and talking to you. But first of all, congratulations. All the Colors of Night just hit the New York Times, didn't it? Last week? Yeah, so yay. Is that after like 50 bestsellers, does that get old, or are you still celebrating? No?
It never gets old. It's just one of the most exciting things that could happen to an author, and you never get past the excitement. At least I sure don't. And what about you? You're the one who's been hitting the list like crazy. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm still like a little kid when it happens. I tell everybody. I text my dad. He always wants to know. Yeah.
I'm the same way. I got family members who want to be texted immediately.
Yeah, yeah, it's like we want to know before it hits, you know, like the news. So my actual first book of yours was one of your historicals under your Amanda Quick name. It was so I just randomly picked it up and I was just like, oh, what's this book? Just I think I probably picked it up because of the step back. Because here's my old copy that I have kept for show and tell. Here's this beautiful step back. So and then seriously, I was still sitting there an hour later, like so absorbed by the story and the voice that you have, because I think your voice travels through all of your pen names. So, but my first question is, you had a lot of pen names. So your three main ones are Jayne Krentz, Jane Castle, and Amanda Quick. But you've had other ones as well. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you ended up with like so many?
Sure, because because it's very hard to explain. I will just say going in that if there are any aspiring authors out there, don't do this. This is not a smart way to run a career. It was not the plan back at the beginning, but there was no plan back at the beginning, so I can't really blame it on that. I usually got a pen name because I had somehow managed to kill off another name. At various points in my career, I've had to reinvent myself several times, and for a while, the other name was trash. So I would come up with a new name. That's the most I can tell you. It actually serves me very well now. It turned out to be a good thing from my point of view, and from a lot of readers who have followed me through the years, because they know now when they pick up either Jane Castle or Amanda Quick or Jayne Krentz, they know what world they're stepping into. And for a lot of readers, that landscape is super important. And I totally get that. So this way, there's no confusion. They know exactly which of my roles. But I can tell you right now that when I go to an autographing or do one of these Zoom events, there's always going to be somebody out there in the audience who will say, oh, I didn't know you wrote as Amanda Quick.
Talking of which, have you ever signed the wrong name in a book? Like the wrong pen name?
Pro tip here. Turn and sign on the author or on the title page where your name is.
In case you forget. I love it. I love it. Okay, actually, that leads in really well to a question I wanted to ask you. So you were one of the first authors to try futuristics, and not just under your Jane Castle name. You actually wrote books like Sweet Starfire and Shield's Lady under your Jayne Krentz name. So what was the impetus behind that? Like, what drove you to try futuristic at a time when, like, I think almost nobody was doing it?
Nobody was doing it should have been a sign that there was. You asked how I lost names at various points along the way. That's how I had to invent Amanda Quick, because I managed to kill off the Jayne Krentz name with an early futuristic. Another pro tip: you don't want to be too far ahead of a wave. I could tell you that the first book I ever read, my total inspiration for my career, of course, is Nancy Drew. But my total inspiration for my career with the psychic and futuristic twist was a one book off by Anne McCaffrey. The book was called Restoree.
I've read that one. Sorry.
We are a small group. Those of us. I think it's the only futuristic she ever did before she went and found the dragon thing, because that's where her career went. And my guess is that's because the Restoree didn't sell any better than my first book did. But that book changed my life. I thought, this is the romance I've been wanting to read and to write. So, and now under my Jane Castle name, I get to write them. So it all works out.
Well, I mean, your books that I found, I mean, that was like, this is what I want to read, you know, like I had such a hard time hunting down copies of the books because I was in New Zealand, and there was just not a lot of romance being brought into the country, and this was pre-ebooks. So this is me trying to desperately find ways to to find these books is so hard. You guys don't know how easy you have it in the age of the internet, and because it's so hard to collect your books, but I did manage because I am, you know, obsessive like that. And I remember the one that I spent so much time tracking down was Orchid, Amaryllis, and Zinnia, because I had to have those three. But now I just have a standing order at the bookstore. They just get me the Jayne and Krentz books. It's great. So you actually haven't been back to your Jayne Castle world, I think, since 2016. Do you think you're going to go back to that anytime soon?
Glad you asked. I turned in the manuscript a couple of months ago, so there is another Dust Bunny book on the way. And for those of you who don't know what dust bunnies are, don't worry about it. But yes, there's another Jayne Castle book coming. Don't have a pub date yet, but I'll get one soon, I'm sure. So I'm excited.
That is so excited. Yay, I'm excited. Actually, you have to explain dust bunnies, because I want to know how you came up with these fuzzy balls of cuteness that, you know, live on an alien planet. And I suppose they're actually aliens because they're native to the environment. And yeah, how'd you come up with the name to call them dust bunnies?
I think I was just looking for a name for something that appears absolutely harmless and not, and just kind of a ball of chaos, you know, a ball of nothing that looks like anything serious. They've got 6 paws and 4 eyes, but by the time you see the teeth, it's too late. There's another side to dust bunnies. They are not just cute. But the main thing I use them for in the stories is kind of to take the place of dogs and cats. You know, animals that show so much about a character when you give that character an animal. And in this case, the animal is psychic. And he's like the perfect dog you ever wanted, or the perfect cat you ever had. You know, plus he can defend you to the death. So you know,
it's kind of like Gremlins. Have you seen that movie? It was an 80s movie. They're like cute, fluffy things, and then they turn into like monsters. So let's talk a little bit about All the Colors of Night, which is your latest release, which I have here, my copy from my bookseller that came to me on release days. I was so excited. I hardly ever actually get hard copy books on release date because I live on the other side of the planet and everything must be shipped here very slowly at the moment. So this is a really interesting book. It's set in, well, I'll let you explain. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Bluestone Project and Fog Lake, which are all involved in this book?
Okay. Well, first of all, for those of you who have read me over a few years, you know that I've always liked to play with the psychic vibe. I don't do werewolves and vampires, but I do love, I can read them and love them, but I don't, it's not my core story. So but the psychic vibe, which to me is just like 1 or 2 steps beyond intuition, that fits with my core story very, very neatly, and I love to work with it. As far as the impetus for the Fog Lake books, well, I always knew that the U.S. government and several major U.S. universities were heavily into paranormal research really starting in the 30s and well into the 1970s, the last century, the last half of the last century. The CIA and the government was pouring a lot of money into paranormal research because they were afraid that the old USSR, the Soviet Union, would get ahead of them. Everybody was looking for the perfect ideal spy, you know, the one that could see over the horizon. So gosh only knows how much taxpayer money went into this. It was pretty well, as far as we know, pretty well shut down by the early 1970s. Mostly, I think, because word got out and it was too embarrassing for the people in charge. Everybody was making fun of them. So supposedly the research has stopped, but do we know that for sure? But when I went back to do the research for the latter half of the 20th century, you open the cupboard door and it just comes falling out. There was so much stuff going on, serious stuff, not the psychic tarot reading or something of that, not that kind of storefront psychic thing, but serious research going on in the labs and in universities, that I didn't have to invent hardly anything. I just kind of roll with it, And I patterned the Bluestone Project as kind of one of those clandestine laboratory situations where something goes horribly awry. Long time ago, and now all these years later, we're seeing the fallout. We're seeing the descendants of the people who were this whole town was run as an experiment, is what happened. And now 3 generations later, we're seeing the problems that are coming, and who's dealing with this has got psychic talents and kind of issues like that. So I know authors are never good when it comes to trying to.
I'm actually really fascinated. I didn't know that much about like the US doing those psychic experiments. So now I'm like, when I fall down an internet hole, when I'm procrastinating from my writing, I will be researching this so I can read all about it too. I'd heard like just little bits and pieces. I didn't realize it was such a big sort of intense and in competition with probably the USSR, I'm guessing there. Yeah, that is really cool. So talking of the psychic abilities, I really noticed that in your books, you have a lot of unique psychic abilities. So in this book, North can, for example, he can basically read the night. So he can sort of track, people, and Sierra's got some really interesting abilities of her own that she can see with people's auras and stuff. And I really love, not going to spoiler it, but I really love how her ability, what she's searching for, is actually in plain sight throughout the book. And it takes her the whole book to figure out, what she should be doing with her abilities. But how do you come up with these abilities?
Oh, says Nalini Singh, who invented universal abilities.
This is different.
It's not different. It's about that question, Nalini. I would just like to say that I could learn from the best.
I don't know. I feel like you're coming up with like just these super unique things that I hadn't really thought about. And that's part of the reason I love your books, is because they still surprise me. Even though you're writing about psychic abilities, which is obviously something I also like to write about. But when I pick up your books, I'm still getting new stuff. So are you doing more research, or are you just sitting there and they just come to you, the ideas?
I don't really do the research on. The research is, I don't know. I've never really relied too much on the psychic research, to tell you the truth. Mostly I just like the small stuff. Like if you could see a little better than than normal human vision, if you can see colors that other people can't see, if you can, the ultraviolet shades and stuff that, it's not impossible to see that. Animals and certain insects can see, but we can't. So I just look for something that's kind of 1 or 2 steps beyond, a different kind of hearing, a different kind of sensitivity. But I like to think that it's all possible. That's probably stretching it, but that's what I'm looking for, is something that rings familiar and yet is just 1 step beyond. That's kind of how I.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because it's often how I work as well. It's sort of like the what if question. What if you could actually, in my case, talk to someone across the world using your mind, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that totally, flows with my thinking as well. One of the things I really love about your books in general, and this is something I've noticed over my many long years of being a fan and reading everything you possibly can write, is how well your hero and heroine work together. So quite often they're solving a mystery, or there's some other obstacle that they are dealing with. For example, in one of my favorite contemporaries of yours, which is Sweet Fortune, it's like a business setting, and the problem is not it's not so much a mystery as opposed to how they're going to deal with this business situation. But the whole way through, even though there's conflict, they're still working together. And so I'm wondering, is that a conscious decision you've made to have your characters interact on that way? Or is it something that's just come out of your writing as you've grown as a writer?
I think that partnership that kind of develops is my part of my core story. That two people have to, the themes I always work with are reinvention and trust. I mean, if I look back, I can see those back right to the very beginning. People are either reinventing themselves for whatever reason, like killing off a writing career, or they're at a turning point in their lives. The other theme I love to work with is trust, because it's the one thing we all do every day, all the time, consciously or unconsciously, and it's incredible big risk. It's a huge risk every time we trust. Just stepping on an elevator, we trust that it's not going to fall to the bottom, you know. But most of the risk that we take is emotional risk, comes with trusting other people. And everybody's been hurt. Everybody's had problems with trust. Everybody's got some issues with trust, you know. And I just love to work with that theme. And so my hero and heroine are always in the process of learning to trust each other, learning that they can trust each other, that they share the core values that allow them to trust each other. I think that would be the fundamentals. From that, the relationship builds. And I put that under pressure by making the situation very dangerous, so that it becomes a life or death kind of decision. And so that amps up the stakes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think that's a big reason why your romances just work so well for me, because by the end of it, I actually believe these two people have learned to trust each other to the point that I can believe in their happy ever after, which I don't get so much where romances where they're constantly in conflict throughout, because I'm always worried, are they going to be fighting after the happy ever after? I want to see them not fighting, I want to see them working together. But so many of the themes that you sort of mentioned, there's a really beautiful poem in your book by Jared Curtis, which I think is beautiful. How did you feel when you first received the poem from him? Because I think you told him what you were thinking of and that you needed a psychic poet. And then he gave you this thing. Did you know it was perfect at once? Or, yeah, so talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, this came about, the psychic poet was not part of the original story, but at some point early on, I realized I needed it. And I'm happy with inventing fiction, but I do not write poetry. So I thought, how am I going to have a poem that kind of marches through the book if I can't write it? And as luck would have it, and we all know there's no such thing as coincidence, I have a friend named Jared Curtis, who is a professor emeritus from Simon Fraser, hello Canada. And he has taught poetry and studied it all his life, and he writes it. And I asked him if he'd be willing to write the poem, and I told him, I just gave him the core conflict of the characters. Two people at a turning point, two people had to reinvent themselves, looking for their passion in life, looking for the way forward, and kind of stumbling around, trying to do the right thing, but kind of stumbling around. And he came back with this incredible poem, which only goes to prove that poets are psychic. There you go.
And so what does he think about being in a New York Times bestselling romance novel?
Oh, he's excited. Who doesn't get excited about the New York Times? And I think poetry has a long tradition of slender volumes and small audiences, so this is kind of cool. But mostly I just want to take. He may be out there in the audience. I know he was going to buy a ticket tonight. So if you're out there, Jared, thank you so much. You added a whole dimension to the book, and I am truly grateful.
Yeah, it is. It's really beautiful, that poem, and I like how you wove it throughout the book so that you get little pieces of understanding as you go.
That I didn't even think about it when I did it, but Jared wrote me a note about it and said that's what he liked about, was one of the reasons he liked the way I had used the poem was that I staged it through the book as the characters are going through their stages. Yeah, you and Jared should talk. You guys think alike. I was just doing it blindly. I
think that's where a lot of writing comes from, isn't it? It's like from instinct, or this, some people call it the muse, or whatever you call it. Sometimes it just comes together in your brain. You just have all these little pieces and they weave together somehow. Yeah, it's a little bit of the magic of writing, I think.
It's magic. Yeah. Magic. It's very hard to explain.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a spoiler adjacent question, but it is not a spoiler, because if you haven't read the book, you won't know what I'm talking about. But am I right to think that Olivia might have the next book in the series? Yes. Okay, I'm happy with that.
Funny you should ask. I'm writing her story now. So.
Oh, very cool. I will use all my connections to get an early copy. Okay, so do you work? So with this Fog Lake series, I know you've previously written like trilogies or quartets. Is this like a closed-ended series, or is this? I feel like this is a bigger backstory. I feel like, are you going to continue longer with this series, do you think?
Our editor, we share the same editor, I believe. Cindy
Who is very awesome.
Cindy, awesome Cindy. Talked to me about that the other day, and she said, and this struck me as something that you've already done that I am now doing behind the fact, of course, because I didn't plan it. But I've kind of created a Jayne verse, like you have a Nalini verse, a universe in which your stories can come and go, and they all sort of fit somehow, even if they're not directly connected one right after the other in terms of plots and stuff. And I think, thanks to Cindy, I think I now see my writing in that way. Everything kind of is there. It's just sitting in different corners of the universe. And you know how it is. You go to all the trouble to build a really cool world. You don't want to just walk away from it real quick. So I would like to play with the future, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, there's so many elements you could explore. Even from the first book to this book, you've gone into different corners of it. And so I can see, as someone who loves series myself, so if I was living, if I had been born in this generation, I would be a fan fiction writer, and I would write fan fiction about this book, because that's what I do in my brain. I make up, okay, this is where the series could go, and these people could get together, and
well,
so yeah.
But I think you found your world, so no need.
So I am going to ask you some sort of just very fanish questions, and this is a super specific question, but I can ask it because I'm doing the interview and I have all the power. So as far as I'm aware, you've only ever done a single duet where you followed one couple for more than one book, and that was Gift of Gold and Gift of Fire, which also I had trouble getting the second book, because I read the first book and I didn't realize there was a second book, but they're awesome. So what was different about those books, or that couple, that you felt like you wanted more time with them?
It's interestingly, that's not the only time I've tried to do a continuing couple. I also did it in the Amanda Quick world with the Lavinia. And
oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
Well, both careers crashed and burned because nobody would follow me through more than one book. They didn't want the second couple and the third story and the fourth story. So the short answer to your story is I killed off the careers. Another time I had to reinvent myself.
Oh, wow. I find that unbelievable, because I think Gift of Gold and Gift of Fire are just, they're such great books.
I'm here to tell you it was true. You can believe it.
Yeah, well, no, you know what, Jayne? I think you were just ahead of your time. You were ahead of your time, and So you just needed to just wait 10 more years and then release it, and it would have all hit back. So, okay. So, when we met, you were showing off the little Kiwi before. So we met when you cruised to New Zealand. Yay! It's a Kiwi, went all the way from New Zealand on a cruise ship. And I know you love cruising. So, and I know you do it every year usually. So what's it being like, sort of grounded this past year? And what cruise will you do when it's safe to do again?
Well, I would just like to say that the Kiwi was a gift from you, which I have treasured, and it sits on my desk to this very day. Every time I look at this, I think of you, and I think of that lovely day in New Zealand. The cruise was great because the cruise. We saw places that I don't think we'll ever get to again, because of the situation as the world it turns. But I think I've sort of fallen in love just toward the end of before the pandemic hit. We took a train ride, and I really fell in love with train travel. I don't know that I'd want to do it for a month at a time because the showers situation, there's issues. But I think once we get rolling again, I would like to do more train travel. I kind of enjoyed it. I love that, sitting back and just watching the scenery go by. And I don't know. How about you? You're the traveler. You told me once that if you didn't travel, you'd be stuck in one place for the rest of your life.
I love trains. I love trains. The last big train I did was in Australia. I did the Northern Pacific, which goes from Perth to Sydney and the other way around. And it's an old train. So it's one of the, so it looks like, if you see an Agatha Christie mystery on a train, it looks like that kind of train. So my writer brain was just going. And, but I love it. I love the peacefulness of it. Like, I actually wrote a lot on that train journey back. And I love that you can see things you wouldn't normally see any other way. There are no roads there. It's the train or nothing. Actually, this is a funny story. The first time I went to the US, I decided to take Amtrak from San Francisco to New York.
That was adventurous.
Yeah, I was young. Yeah, I didn't know much about anything. And let's just say it was an adventure, but it didn't put me off train travel. And again, I saw things that I wouldn't have never seen in a car, because there's literally, the train goes through this part of the mountains and there's nothing else, so trains for sure. And and I think train travel will come back a lot faster than cruises. So yay for trains.
Come back even faster if they improve the showers.
Yeah, it's true. Well, they got only a tiny bit of space to work on, work with. It's like tiny. Okay, so I've got another personal question. So I am a plant lady. So my aim is to turn my house into a forest. And I actually just got some trees delivered today because my forest is not yet tree enough. So I just get really zen working in the garden and looking after my plants. Like I walk around every morning talking to them and telling them, oh, they did great, and fixing the ones that, need a bit of water and things. So what's your zen thing? What do you do that sort of just chills you out?
This is going to sound so shallow. I like to shop. I like to shop at Nordstrom. I like to go grocery shopping. I just like to shop.
That's awesome. I love it.
But it gives me a perfect chance to ask you a question. Can I? Or
yes.
do I have to? I can't.
No,
okay.
No, go for it.
Okay, because the plant thing fascinates. Your passion for plants really interests me, because it strikes me that it goes with your incredible world building skills. And right now you're you're teaching us really what is for a lot of us an exotic world, which is New Zealand, in your new thrillers. In A Madness of Sunshine, the first one, and I haven't read the one coming out, which is Quiet in Her Bones, but I loved A Madness of Sunshine. But it's obvious to me that you're going to be able to do that kind of world building in the contemporary simply because you have an eye for those things. And I wondered how much of that is related, do you think, comes from your plant obsession?
It is an obsession.
Those two passions, I bet they're linked somehow.
I don't think it's a direct correlation, but I think it's more a case of how I feel when I'm with plants. And it's the same thing I feel when I'm in nature. So it's that sense of just peace, and I can really pay attention to what's around me, basically. So if I'm, for example, if I'm going for a bushwalk, and so in New Zealand, we don't say forest, or we usually say the bush, and it's just like these gigantic prehistoric forests. So if I go for a bushwalk, you know, I don't have headphones and my phone's kind of off, and I'm just in that really peaceful space, and there's no noise, and I can look at the tiny fern fronds forming on the branches, and I can see the rocks, and I can see, like, I really appreciate the danger inherent in the wild as well, and that we're welcome there, but only as visitors. And so it all kind of just plays into it. But I think on a smaller level, being with my plants at home, it's that same sense of peace, you know, of being able to really focus on these small elements and, yeah, just be in the moment. And yeah, I guess that's where it comes from, the descriptions and things. Yeah.
Because that's one of your brilliant talents, is that description. You really bring worlds alive. You bring exotic universes alive, but you're also bringing New Zealand alive in ways that most of us, even having been there, you know, who sees all of a country in one cruise stop anyway. But I kind of have a feeling that your eye for that kind of detail is probably useful when it comes to description, because I really suck at description.
I think
don't listen, Cindy, don't listen.
I was gonna say, I think all of us have like things that we're good at as writers, and then things that just are harder. And yeah, so I think personally your repartee between your characters is brilliant. I mean, the conversations are so flawless, like the way they flow, it's just so easy. And so that's a real gift to me. When I read it, I get sucked in, and I'm like, when I get one of your books, I tell everyone to leave me alone. I'm just reading this book. I need to be in this book. Don't talk to me. So yeah, I think, and we also, don't you feel like we grow as writers, at that we do get better skills as we go along? Like, I don't know if I could have written the thrillers 10 years ago. I wasn't the writer I am today back then. That's not to say what I was producing back then was bad. It was just different, because it's a continuous growth process.
You were elsewhere in your universe.
That's right. Yeah.
I think you're right, and I think that we most of the writers I know, so I'm asking you, maybe the dialogue comes smoothly to me because I hear the stories. My stories don't kick in. I don't really start getting to know my characters until they start talking. And that's when I learn about them. And description is much harder for me because I don't see the story visually. It's always dialogue. What does it come visually for you, or like a film, or is it dialogue, or do you know?
It's audio visual. It's like a movie. It's a continuous movie, and it's actually why I can do like the short stories and things I do just for my newsletter. It's because I can dip into the movie and take out a scene. Yeah, I did a workshop once, and it was, I think, like a brain scientist, and she was saying that people are either audio visual or audio visual in their memory and how they visualize things. So yeah, that's really interesting that so for me, it could be a voice, or it could be just the whole scene. for example, with Guild Hunter, you know, I saw Elena and I heard her voice, but I very vividly saw the alley she was standing in. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And actually that ties into a question I had for you, which I'm going to nudge in here as we're heading into the time limit. Do you start with your characters or your plot? Because I really love all your books, and they all have quite a strong thread of mystery in them, I think it's fair to say. So do you start with that mystery element or with your characters?
I wish I were one of those people that could do that, those great outlines of your characters, you know, where you could tell where they were born and what languages they speak and how old they are and what their parents were like and all that good stuff. I can't. I don't get to know them until I'm into the story, sadly. It would be very useful to know more about them up front. And then so my characters, I think, are always my characters. And I think for most writers, that's true. I won't speak for you, but I would say it's true too. Because we like your characters. and so you don't suddenly turn on us and write unlikable heroes. Yeah, we always are in sympathy with them. So I think that much I know they're going in, but I'm going to discover them after I have a setting for them and a conflict that I can put them into, and then see what their problems are and what they need. The problem with writing a book my way, again, I do not recommend this to aspiring writer, is that I wake up every morning on the edge of anxiety because I am not always sure where I'm going next. By the second draft, I'm good. I have a vision of the book and I know where I'm going, and I really enjoy the second draft. But that first draft is like 3 months of tension, and I have never found a way around it. How about you?
Yeah, I'm actually quite similar. I always say I write my way into the story. I don't really plot or outline or anything. I literally just need an idea, and then I just start writing. And I do a very fast first draft because I'm telling myself the story and I want to know what's going to happen. And it's like terrible. Like if anyone looked at it, if one of the readers looked at it, they'd be like, what is this hideous thing that you have created? And there's gaps all over the place, and it says things blow up here or insert something here. But it works for me because by the end of that draft, I know the people, and that for me is the critical thing. I have to know these people, and sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's harder. One book, it took me an entire first draft and then half of a second draft to get to know these particular characters because they're very closed in. And other times I know the characters really, really well because I write series. So I might have known a character for 10 books. And but then it's a case of getting under their skin, because when a character is a secondary character, you only see them from other people's point of view, and to get to know them from their own point of view is a whole different exercise. But I think we write quite similarly in that way, in that it sounds like we both need to just work our way into the story and into the heads of the characters.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sounds like it. We may be a party of two, but
I think there are more like us than admit it. Okay, I've got another superfan question. So at one point you were connecting your Jayne Castle books, your Jayne and Krentz books, and your Amanda Quirk books with the Arcane Society. And so how did that go, first of all? And do you plan to continue weaving that into your stories?
I think so. It feels it after our editor kindly freed me up to think that way. I mean, really gave me permission to make that a possibility. I was riveted by the idea. Blew my mind, as we used to say. Because I think that is what I need to do. I think that's where I want to go. Did you set out to do it that way? Just asking for a friend?
Are you doing the Side Changeling books?
Yeah. Did you know
Um,
how big that world was going to get when you started, or did
no.
it grow? Okay.
I mean, I had a certain idea. I knew where I wanted to go in what I call the first season. I knew what I began with, and I knew the ending I was going towards. But like I said, I am quite instinctive as a writer. So I just went into it blind, and you let my subconscious guide me, and it's grown and grown and grown, and I love it. And there's all these nooks and crannies and that I want to explore, and so many characters, and yeah, it's fabulous. You'll love it, Jay. You'll love this whole new world you're going into. But I do have a technical question for you related to that. So one of the things that I had to learn when I started a series, the Side Changing series was my first series, was how to keep track of details. Because I can keep track of characters, no problem. They're in my head, you know. But it's the tiny, tiny details. And I want to say specifically the Arcane Society, just because it's multi-generational with details that are historical, you know, and contemporary and things like that. So how do you keep track of information like that?
Poorly. Again, for aspiring writers, don't do it my way. I could give a whole seminar on what not to do to get published. Well, because I never saw it going very far. So I didn't bother back at the beginning. I had everything in my head. I didn't have to worry about it. And then after a while, you realize you're really deep into this world, and you say to yourself, I said to myself, I'm going to go back, read each one of those books, and make some kind of a style sheet for every single book, you know, and every unique thing that's in that book that I need to remember going forward. And here I am 10 years later, and I still haven't found the time. But yeah, anybody out there thinking of starting a long-running series, start keeping track now. That's all I can say. I think I am like you, though. I don't worry about the characters because they're there. They're already they're people I know.
Yes.
But the little stuff that you invent as you go along, and you wrote it down on page 32. You don't need it again, you know, but maybe you need it again, and then you have to. Yeah, not a good way to write. I'm still looking for that to write.
Maybe you can just rope in your fans and be like, okay, each of you is assigned a book. Please write this wiki for me with all the details.
That's great.
Yeah. And I'll kill you off in my next book. So that can be your reward. You can be a victim in a future book. There's actually an author, I think, who does that, who like has a charity auction, and you can apply to be a victim, yeah. So, you know, it's a great idea. So we talked about how psychic abilities, you know, weave through a lot of your work, not just the paranormal stuff, but it's even made an appearance in your contemporaries. What is it about psychic power that fascinates you? And is it something that you've been interested in like a really long time?
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember a time when I didn't have that element in my own personal fantasy stories. You know, the stories we all told, writers start telling themselves usually early on in life, the little stories we weave in our head, and it was always part of that. So I don't really know where it comes from, but I just know it's something I enjoy working with. When I stand back and look at it, it's very useful in terms of showing a bond between my main characters, or showing something else about the character. It's like using an animal in a sense to show something about the character, how they handle a talent. And I always say there's always a dark side to every talent. So there's no talent is like this perfect gift. It's always got an underwater side, you know, there's a price for talent of any kind. Whether it's 30 years practicing piano or it's just, there's a price to be paid for any serious talent. And it's usually emotional, some level of, it's going to involve relationships, and it's going to involve emotions. So I'm looking for that. When I invent a talent, I'm looking for how it's going to affect that person's relationships with other people in the stories. A lot of my characters have panic attacks, which seems to be a perfectly logical explanation for why it's hard to handle a psychic talent. Yeah, where was I going with this? I get to ask you then one, right? I get to ask you, what would you say? I talked a little bit about my core story, reinvention and trust issues. What do you see anything in your core? I mean, I could say something what I see in your books, but what do you see? What's your sense of what your core
I
story?
think there's one thing I did realize quite a few years into my work with a book that I was having difficulty writing, and I couldn't figure out why until I figured this out. And I realized that all of my stories revolve around family. So not just like blood family or genetic family, though I also have those families, but the found families, the band of brothers with the pack. And those interconnected relationships are really important to me, both as a reader and as a writer. And this particular book that I was having trouble with, the characters were very isolated. And I realized that aspect of community is really important. And in my romances, that translates to, warmth and affection and friendship. But there's also a dark side to that. And now that you made me think about it, it comes out even in the mysteries. So we still have a community, like Quiet in Her Bones is like in this cul-de-sac where everyone's got secrets, but they're all interconnected again. So I think that is at the core of everything I write. There is a network of relationships, a webbing. And I think that's partially why I write series, and why I actually have to stop myself turning everything into a series, because I'm so compelled by those relationships and I want to follow every thread. I want to find out about this person and this person that you met once, but you really liked because they were like, they had a really good conversation with this guy. Like, it's just, yeah. So yeah, I think for me, it's that with the romances, of course, the romance is the core, but everything that revolves around it just shows us so much about the characters, how they interact. And like I said, even with the mysteries. So my protagonist in Quiet in Her Bones, he's not the nicest, but the way he interacts with his little half-sister just shows you this really interesting aspect of his personality. It's not a spoiler to say he calls himself a sociopath, this guy, but he takes his little kid sister out for like donuts after school. So it's just, I think when you have other people around characters, there's so much you can see about the character. Yeah,
I agree. And that's what I would say if someone asked me to describe your book, because your book's that the first thriller, Madness of Sunshine, that was a very closed community with everybody having secrets and everybody having a relationship that other people weren't always aware of. And that just made for fascinating reading. I loved it.
I'm so excited. I'm trying to pretend to be all like calm right now, but I'm not. I'll get off the phone and then I'll call my mom and be like, guess what Jayne and Krentz said? She really loved my book.
Say hello to her for me.
I did have a connected question about that, actually, about secondary characters. So I feel like you write some really, really interesting secondary characters. Like in the latest book is, and I think she was in the previous book too, the Oracle, the librarian. Have you ever written a secondary character who was meant to just stay a secondary character and then was like, nope, I would like a book, please. You are writing my book now.
I think they all start out as just meant to be secondary characters. I haven't so much had the experience where I had to make a character the hero of the next book, but I knew they needed to be in the next book. That happens a lot to me. And writing a loosely connected series like I am now, without two main characters going forward every time, I've developed a community in that world that will move forward. And so I enjoy going back to the characters in that community. So I do use it in that sense. And especially with the Oracle. I mean, I loved inventing the Oracle, so I didn't want to give her up.
I love how she just spouts like, prophecies. And then it's like, okay, it's done now. I'm normal now.
That's it. That's all I got today.
Yeah, I know. I love it. So, who are your favorite authors, and who are you? Is there any particular books you're really loving right now?
Well, of course, Nalini Singh of New Zealand is one of my all-time favorites. What do I got? I'm really enjoying some. I know. For those out there who love, this is a mystery bookstore, right? So if you love period mysteries, those that are set in a historical setting, I can highly recommend Victoria Thompson. And her latest book is City of Schemes. I just finished it. And this is a fascinating, it's one of those female sleuths set in a space and time. And this is like 1920, perhaps, right after World War I. And the heroine in this series is a reformed con artist who grew up in a family of professional con artists, and she knows all the tricks, right? So she's living in the glamorous world of the Gilded Age, but she brings those old con artist skills in her toolkit to solve crimes. And that just caught me. I just love that. So that would be one. I'm also just finished Christina Dodd's, not Stranger She Knows. This is horrible. Don't tell her I couldn't remember.
It's a secret, everybody.
Set in Alaska. John, help me. Set in Alaska, John. I'll think about it before we're done. I'll get back to you. Rachel Grant is an interesting author. She's doing very steamy romantic suspense with an archaeological background. She's an archaeologist, and her story, her plots always involve the problems of the crimes and stuff that are associated with archaeology around the world. And so Rachel Grant's books featuring her archaeological heroines. Think Amelia Peabody, except contemporary.
Oh, I can see a comment saying wrong alibi for the Christina.
Yes. Thank you. Jeez. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Wrong alibi. That's Christina Dodd. It's set in Alaska. It's really kind of cool because it's part of this, what I'm seeing a lot of now, which is kind of a Gothic vibe. Have you noticed that in some of the recent thrillers that are coming along, or has that been on your radar at all? I've sort of
No.
It's not the classic Gothic. It's definitely it's a reinvention of it. But that's my theory, is that there are no genres never go away. They just get reinvented, and we just don't always recognize them. But there seems to me there's a real Gothic vibe out there in a lot of the stories now, and I think that maybe because no matter how you play it, it's always an intimate story. It's always closed-in house of secrets in one way or another, stuck on a chalet in the Swiss Alps, or something. And there's always a killer. And I don't know. It's just I've noticed it's kind of a vibe that seems to be strong right now.
Talking of Christina Dodd, I know you've got quite a close-knit group of writer friends that you've been friends with a long time. Has that been really important to you as a writer over the years? Yeah?
Absolutely critical. And the one pro tip I would give here, which is not not how to kill your career tip, is if you're interested in writing, find a group where you feel comfortable. Find your people. Find the ones that you can bond with. And if you're having trouble finding a writers group that works with you, go contact the public library. They'll know them all nationally and locally, and internationally now in some cases. So yeah, that writers need to talk to other writers.
Oh, Well,
Oh, I'm sorry, Nalini, were you about to ask another question?
I had one more. Can I ask one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, good. Okay. So I love, obviously, your paranormal psychic stuff, but I also really like your straight mysteries like River Road. I really loved River Road. Will you still be doing the straight mysteries as well?
I do like working with them, but I tend to work more with them in my Amanda Quick name in my 1930s series. And the reason I like that is because I don't have to worry about cell phones or forensics, or it's more of a classic solve the crime with logic sort of story. So that's where that end of my storytelling is going, is into the Burning Cove series. So
I didn't even mention that. I love those books. It's such a different time period, and I love how you dress your characters and just everything about it. It's fabulous. Okay, so
I'm doing the glamorous side of the 30s, not
yes.
not the real side.
They would make such great movies, those books. Great little mystery movies with like you can just see the actress in the role, and yeah, it's perfect.
From your lips to Netflix's ears.
So before I get into, like, there are some crowd questions, but there are a few crowd comments that I just wanted to run through real quick. So you were talking about how Jared felt about the poem being in the book. So he is watching, and he says he is here and he absolutely loves it. So thanks for tuning in, Jared. Also wanted to mention everybody in the crowd is very excited that the Dust Bunnies are coming back. Very excited about that. And also, Jayne, you're totally right about Gothic having its moment. Like, Ruth Ware's done, like, her kind of take on it. Rachel Hawkins just had a really great one called The Wife Upstairs that did it. There's also a really fantastic one that came out last March that's about to come out in paperback called The Woman in the Mirror by Rebecca James. And it's just this, like, 1940s Cornwall, the governess is out on the moors and, like, the wolves are howling. Like, yeah, there's such a good big Gothic vibe coming, and we are like so here for it at the bookstore. Also wanted to mention, you guys mentioned wikis. If either of you guys know Gail Carriger, she started a fan-made Wikipedia thing for her series where she just got it kind of up and running and just let like the fans go nuts, adding like specific details and stuff, and she uses that as her series Bible now.
Fascinating.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to get into questions, but before we get into the crowd questions, Nalini, you've been so gracious this evening to chat with Jayne. Can you tell us a little bit about your new book that is coming out in February?
This was my pleasure. Honestly, I've been so excited to be doing this. So my February book is my second thriller. It's a standalone. So if you didn't read A Madness of Sunshine, it's completely unconnected. You can pick it up at any point. And it's set again in New Zealand, so I'm calling it New Zealand Noir. You know, it's the dark side of New Zealand. And I kind of kicked it off because, there's all this beautiful Scandinavian noir coming out, set in these really dark sort of icy climates and that people don't really know much about. And I was like, New Zealand kind of has all those prerequisites, So yeah, it's set in this really exclusive cul-de-sac with some very, wealthy people. And 10 years ago, Nina Rai disappeared, and she was sort of like a wealthy, I guess, trophy wife. Very intelligent, but basically a rich man's wife. And she disappeared at the same time as $250,000. So everyone thought she took the money and ran, except for her son. He was 16 at the time. He never quite believed that, and he heard a scream that night. And now, 10 years later, as the book begins, they find his mother. They find bones in the forest, and they're in the car that she disappeared in that night. And the forest has basically eaten up the car and hidden it all these years. And, the money's gone, and every sign is that Nina disappeared that night and that she never actually left the cul-de-sac. So, so I think the tagline is, nobody leaves this cul-de-sac. So, yeah, it's creepy. It's a mystery, and Arav's got some issues. So he's not possibly the most reliable narrator. But yeah, I love it. I love this book. Yeah, I hope you all do too.
Awesome. So everybody, if you were watching, so if you didn't catch that, that is Quiet in Her Bones, which actually comes out February 23rd. And we're going to have some signed book plates for it. So if you pre-order from Murder by the Book, you'll get those. And Erin has dropped a couple of links in the chat where you can do those. So one of the questions from the crowd, you guys both have written in several genres. Do you have a favorite to write in, and do you have a favorite to read? Let's start with Jayne.
I don't really, but what I do love is moving between the genres. It's very refreshing for me to come out of, say, the Amanda Quick 1930s books and then go into a Jane Castle futuristic or into a Krentz contemporary. And that, so it may be confusing to readers, but it refreshes me as an author. So I do love that aspect.
There was a comment, somebody mentioned that they love that you have the different pseudonyms because they basically know, like, when they pick up a book, they have an idea which one of your, what kind of one of your books it's going to be. So that's awesome. How about you, Nalini?
It's basically, I was going to say, it's the identical answer. I like switching between, yeah, the genres or the subgenres, just because it's like, even between my two sort of, my Guild Hunter series and Side Changeling, they're very different in tone. So it's just, yeah, it just feels like I get a whole new burst of life at the beginning with each switch. And I think the second part was about reading.
Oh, yeah.
That tends to cycle. So it's just whatever I'm in the mood for, I'll read. I read very eclectically. Like right now I'm reading, actually rereading a whole bunch of older Jonathan Kellerman books because I follow the Alex Delaware series, which is fantastic. But yeah, it's been so long since I read, the starting books. So I thought it'd be quite fun to go back and reread those. So it's just all cyclic. And I'm also reading some cute contemporary romances, nonfiction. It's all thrown in there. Yeah.
And so, Jayne, you said, based on kind of some of the recommendations you had earlier, it sounds like you hop around reading-wise as well.
Yeah, I also enjoy a nonfiction. I love good nature writing. And it's just a different way to view the world. And recently I read Entangled Wives. It's about mushrooms, and I could care less about mushrooms. This way I have a whole new respect for mushrooms now. And I'm reading Metazoa right now, which is on looking at animal brains to see how the brain develops, how it became human. An octopus is a really smart animal, but it's never going to fall for a conspiracy theory. So what happens there that makes it different? I find that fascinating.
That is very cool. Have you ever tried to listen to nonfiction? I find nonfiction on audiobook really interesting because I don't know, it's like someone's telling me the information. Yeah.
That's a good point.
So Jayne, Laurel says, you've been writing paranormal romances since 1986. What's changed? Why do you think it took so long for the genre to become popular?
I think number one, I think it took getting rid of the sleazy covers. That was a big jump. And the covers have become sophisticated and mainstream now, but they weren't back in the old days. I saw a cat go by. And I also think that we've got a new generation, not new, but generation of women coming up who don't give a dang what other people think about what they read. Mm-hmm. And in the old days, I can tell you, you thought twice about opening a romance novel on an airplane because you knew people were going to make judgments about you and your reading. So hooray for the younger generation that doesn't give a darn and reads what it wants.
And so Nalini, Laurel also says, you've been at the forefront for main characters who are multicultural. She finds it exciting. And do you find that your fans embrace that?
Yeah. I think because I've always been that way, my fans are people who love, having that diversity of character. And it's actually been wonderful. Like when have book signings, or even online events, you get people from all over the world, sort of a very diverse audience, which I love. I love looking out and seeing in a live audience the vast array of people who find something in the books that speaks to them. And it's just important to me as well, because this is my world that I live in. It is very diverse, and so just that's what comes out when I write. And I'm really glad it resonates with the readers.
So for you, Nalini, Laurel also asked, she's really glad that you started adding more suspense to your repertoire. What made you decide to jump into the world of thrillers?
Actually, I'm a huge suspense and thriller reader. I have been my whole life. I don't know, I have this joke that every 7 years or so I get the 7-year itch, except it's about I have to try something different with books. So the last time it happened, I wrote like a contemporary series with rock stars. And so this time around, I just, the mood, everything was just right. And I had this idea for New Zealand, setting something in New Zealand. And I just thought I'll just write it and see what comes out. And it turned out to be this sort of dark mystery. And I just ran with it, and I'm loving it. So yeah, it's just something that happened, but it's a case of things building after a long period of time with my reading, the things I was seeing. I was on the west coast of the South Island, and it's so inspiring because it's dark and dangerous and beautiful. So it just all came together.
Yeah. So Jane Aaron asks, so what are some fun, interesting things you discovered during your research for the 30s for the Burning Cove series?
Oh, it's like a treasure trove of plot material. There was so much going on, not just in the, they were inventing robots. Women were going out into the world in a way that they continued to do through the war, and then changed abruptly after the war. And when they kind of went back into the home. But the 30s, they were Amelia Earhart was the heroine. And there's the dark shadow of the oncoming World War II, which has so much plot material because, for example, the biggest secret at the time was radar. And let me tell you, if you don't think it's hard to do a plot that involves the secrets of radar when the word had not yet been invented, I would just like to say lots of plot material is what I'm finding right now.
Yeah. And so Megan says, Jane, she says, you have many wonderful couches in your books. Is that a passion for you?
Yes. You want to see my couch here? Orange, my favorite color. My current couch.
And so for you, Nalini, Megan says she loves how you weave in social media and swag into your books, and she loves that Elena ends up on t-shirts. Does this make you laugh when you write about them, and you seem to have a lot of fun making her be embarrassed?
Yes, because can you imagine having friends like Elena has, them not making t-shirts when she sort of becomes this big thing and everyone's like, oh, she's the hunter angel. Of course they're going to put her face and like her wings on a glitter t-shirt and then wear it in front of her because of course they are. So it just comes naturally from the characters and the kind of world they inhabit, especially with the guild hunters. They're going to rag each other mercilessly. So yeah, it's good fun.
So for both of you, is there any genre that you haven't tackled yet that you're itching to at some point?
The future is open.
Yeah. So we just have to wait a couple more years for Nalini's answer to see what she wants to do next.
I have to wait on mine too. I will say that I have truthfully never had a story that had to go outside romantic suspense. That's one way or another. It's what I write. And there's always been a place for it in that genre.
So before we head out, I wanted to give Jane a chance. Jane, did you have any, a couple questions or any questions that you wanted to ask Nalini while we've got her before we head out?
I think I got most of them in. I just want to say again how much I admire your work and love your work. And your incredible world building abilities are an inspiration to me.
Oh, I'm gonna cry. Thank you. This has been such a pleasure. I am such a big fan. I honestly have like 6 shelves full of your books. And I recently did a shelf reshuffle because, moved some new things. I didn't move your books. They're still there because they have to be present at all times. So this has been so fun, and I hope we can do it again.
Oh, I'd love to. Love to see you again.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for joining in and buying tickets and books tonight. As we mentioned, we have signed book plates to go with All the Colors of Night, which is available now, and we will have signed book plates to go with Quiet in Her Bones, which comes out February 23rd. You can order those from murderbooks.com. If you guys do live in Houston, wanted to mention that the bookstore is now open for people to come in and browse, so please come see us. We know everybody is not comfortable coming in at the moment, but so we're also doing curbside pickup that's available. If you don't live in Houston, we're available at Murder Books all the time. I wanted to mention real briefly a couple things we've got coming up. We're going to be chatting with MJ Rose on February 10th. We're super excited about that. It's not on the website yet, but we just got Patricia Briggs confirmed for March 20th for any other paranormal fans out there. Charlene Harris, we're going to be chatting with her on February 26th. And then also Heather Graham in March 23rd. So lots of great stuff coming up. Most of those are just kind of open events that'll be on the store's Facebook and YouTube. And also wanted to mention we did over 130 virtual events in 2020 with over 200 authors. So those are all available on the store's YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to rewatch any part of tonight's event, just give us a couple of days to get it uploaded onto YouTube, and we'll be sending out a private link in the next couple of days for everybody to be able to view that. Jayne and Nalini, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been so much fun. Hopefully once the world rights itself, we'll be able to do this or something similar again in the store. So you guys take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
So
Bye.
much. Thank you. Good night.